Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast, your weekly look inside the world of fly fishing presented by Pete Tigers. If you're enjoying listening, please consider subscribing.
The last time I saw my guest for today, I was shin deep in water casting to mullet. I really enjoyed his company and was deeply impressed with his handling of his boat and his skills with the coffee machine too. I'm pleased to welcome Paul Jennings along today, who lives and breathes saltwater fly fishing in the UK and further afield too. Paul, great to have you on the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing, buddy?
Very good. Thanks for inviting me. It's a thrill to be on.
Oh, it's fantastic to see you. And last time, as I said in the introduction, we were wading in water. We'd drunk some fine coffee, and it looks as though you're drinking something spectacular to start your day this morning.
Yeah, I had a quick shot just to get me going and lively enough to do this. I feel like I'm exposing myself this morning, but we'll see how it goes.
We won't go too deeply into that, but I know when we went out on the boat, let's talk about the coffee a little bit, because I sort of share your love for it as well, perhaps not as strong as you do, but is that an important start to your day? I know when we were on your boat that you sort of opened out this contraption and made us some stunning coffee to start a very early start to the day. Is that how you like to celebrate the start of a fishing day, or is that just a normal day really?
It's a normal day. It's become a habit over the last 6 years when I bought this little hand presser device for my birthday. It's the best present I've ever had, and I've used it every day since. And people are stunned at this thing. It's just like a little pump. Put coffee, you have a fresh espresso in the morning, and it's a nice thing to do. And I love entertaining and hosting people. And when I've got a trip on, it's just an extra little touch. So it's a nice thing, and I quite enjoy having taken it with me abroad and having a little espresso in some bizarre places like a sandbank somewhere on a kayak, etc., etc. I've even had it on a plane, but you get some funny looks, and security are getting used to it now because it looks a bit like a gun. So, it's my secret weapon in terms of our reactions for mullet. So. It gets me up early and active.
It definitely helps, doesn't it? I know I like to start the day, and I'll drink tea and coffee, but fishing and coffee for me seem to go together really, really well. But you're definitely right about honing reflexes and everything else, isn't it? That I find once I've had those few coffees, whatever they may be, that I do hit the fish a little bit better when I'm caffeine fueled more than anything else. Do you find the same?
Absolutely, yeah. And a little shot is much easier for my age than waders having to go for a wee all the time. It's not great. So it does the job, and I can still wade all day without having too much trouble. But I like my coffee. What can I say?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Having spoken to people on the podcast, and we've sort of reflected more so on trout season than anything else. And I know we're almost into February now. And looking back on 2021 from your season, I thought it might be kind of interesting to get your thoughts on how 2021 went for you, because from a trout point of view, we all talked about the cold weather and how it took time for the trout to start rising and didn't really get going till sort of May, June sort of time, certainly where I am. Would it be a similar sort of case with those colder starts on the flats where you're looking for the mullet, and perhaps when you start looking for the bass as well? Was it a similar sort of case for you, or do you just look closely at water temperature and go from there?
Temperature. In fact, I had my earliest mullet last year than ever. I got one at the end of March. And this year, Gary Brazier in Cornwall has already had a few, and it's just amazing. So I think it's water temperature. Very strange season. Had an early start. I had my best season, actually, but it seemed very prolonged. It stop, a little bit here, a little bit there. Nothing major, just strange, no pattern to it. We had some good days, though. We really did. And it wasn't a bad season, just a bit strange, but not normal at all.
It's interesting to hear you say that as well, given what I just said on that segue into that question, that it seems as though the climate is affecting us across the board as anglers, isn't it?
I think so. It's a good thing in some respects. In warmer water brings more species in. I think we can see that from some of the things that come up offshore. We've got tuna coming in. Um, but yeah, especially for the mullet, the warmer it is, they're after the shrimp, and it's really a matter of getting the bait there for them to come in. So the warmer the better for me. Cold season does slow the start of the season, and a lot of rain does too. I remember last year it could have gone on for longer, but the rains just came, and it kind of spelled the end of it. Because cold, murky, dirty water isn't really conducive to what we do, which is sight fishing on flats.
Yeah.
But having said that, there is fish out there in the deeper water. Wintertime, I go out in the deeper water in the boat catch bass, because deeper water stays warmer longer and it's clearer. Whereas inshore, it's very muddy. All the rivers are browning up, and you have to go quite far to get some visibility to find some fish. But yeah, inshore, rain and cold does kill it.
Yeah, and just as a sort of a newbie, really not understanding mullet fully, would obviously come on to bass as well, and I know that was a way for you into fly fishing. But where do the mullet go? Do they go a long distance out? Do they travel, or are they creatures that will stay sort of in the area? And like you say, when the food comes in, that they will come onto the flat and eat it. Do they go far?
I believe they do. I fish mostly in estuary, and I have seen them going out to sea. The theory is they go out to the Channel Islands into the deeper water, etc. But I have no evidence of that. But I see them when they come in, because they come in en masse, and it's quite a sight to see them arrive. Because they're quite lively at times, eating off the surface and make a bit of a fuss, and you can see shoals and shoals of them. Not necessarily catchable, because they might just be there exploring, waiting for the bait, and they're quite finicky. Hence, we get quite a lot of foul hooked fish early season, because they're there but they're not quite ready for it. And I've noticed early season you get more foul hookups.
That must be fascinating seeing, and I've experienced it myself, seeing fish appear. But certainly, I guess during times like this when we're not fishing as much, that when you actually see them start to appear on the flats for the first time, that must be quite an exciting moment. And coming into that, are you sort of venturing out with your fingers crossed, hoping that you're going to see them and waiting for that moment? And do you have those periods where you're sort of heading out, seeing nothing, heading back, and then that special moment when you actually see them starting to appear must be pretty cool, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've described it really, really well. It's like gold, prospecting the gold, wandering around, nothing happening, and then that moment where you see a fish, or possibly see a lot of fish, just stops you in your tracks, and you get all excited, and then I feel like I'm scouting for the community. When I see this fish out, it just it sends people crazy. However, like I said, early season you can see fish, but they're really quite difficult, and yeah. But you got to keep going at them. They will turn on at strangest times. So you got to be out there, and you got to be in them. But yeah, I absolutely love those first sightings. They fill me with joy. And I run a marina in Poole Harbour, so I do see them there from work. Deeper water and around boats, so not necessarily catchable, but it's a real good indicator for me. And early season, I'll be going down my marina every single day looking for signs. So I get a bit of heads up before I have to go out wading.
Nice. And is there a correlation between mullet arriving and bass arriving? I guess there probably is.
I think so. I know 8 degrees is the magic number for bass, centigrade. They can be around. I know Mark Cowling has been catching them on lures, but generally 8 degrees and on, 10 degrees, and you're really in on the numbers. So that's what they're looking for, 8-degree water temp, and that's when it all starts happening. And bass and mullet often go together. Often catch bass along with the mullet. In fact, sometimes some really big ones, which has been a bit of a revelation. A big bass catching this tiny little shrimp pan just shows you that they're in hunting like everything else. It's not all about big bass eating mackerel and things. Big bass will get some shrimp too. And catching a big bass on a 6-weight in a strong tide is quite something.
I bet. They're such an aggressive fish, bass, aren't they? They're, again, I know a bit about them. I've caught a fair few, but they're just so aggressive. And I've even pulled things like dry flies across the surface on a G&H sedge, I think, and I caught a bass that way, a small schoolie, I know that way, but they're just so aggressive, aren't they?
Oh, big time. Yeah, you can kind of tell by the way they hit and then the way they head shake quite a bit. Don't fight as long and hard as a mullet, but I mean, they're great things. And even little ones with attitude can really pull your strings sometimes. But, no, I love bass.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess you're starting. Are we too early? We're sort of at 30th of Jan. This is being recorded. Are we too early to start a countdown to when our prospective seasons start?
I will kind of get serious at the end of next month. March is the earliest I've had them, and that was at the end of March. I will spend the whole of March just wandering around and looking for them, and possibly when I'm in the boat, just looking as I'm going out to see signs. Because the good thing about mullet is they're quite easy to spot in terms of the disturbance they make on the water. They're easily spooked. So, if you've got a bunch of kayaks or a bunch of birds, they're really good indicators because they spook the fish and you can see them from a mile off. So, just watching the signs really. Obviously with bass, it's about hearing the turns, which is a magical sound. You go out and you hear the first turn squawking, there's sand eels around. And when you see them diving, then, you're onto something and start looking really, really serious. So, love the spring, love the start. Yeah.
Lovely.
Can't wait to get out there.
No, well, we kick off on the salmon on 1st of March. So I think February is pretty short, so I can get through that a little bit. I've not been doing a lot of fishing over winter, actually. So I'm sort of kind of getting ready to start my countdown, perhaps from the 1st of February till the 1st of March. It doesn't feel so long away. What some of the comments that you mentioned when you were describing the mullet, I thought was kind of interesting and brings me around nicely to comparisons between, let's say, mullet and bonefish. And you mentioned the word flats, you mentioned the word spotting them. Do you think that's a fair description, calling them a British bonefish? Do you think that's about right?
I do. All three species are slightly different, but the fact they're on skinny water, you can see them, they have kind of the same habits. I don't think they're quite as quick or quite as aggressive. Bonefish, when they're in the mood, will take your fly. It takes a little bit more to tease a mullet. Similar, golden grey will just take off like a bonefish. They're the boy racers of the family, really, and act quite similar. Not quite as fast and don't run quite as long, but they're dogged. I mean, you have you don't net a mullet first time. Most of the time, it will see the net and run again. So they're more dogged, but same sort of habits, same habitat, and it's great practice. But if you fish for mullet, I think you'll find bonefish pretty easy because you're doing the same things, the same habitat, looking for the same signs. But bonefish will take the fly a lot readily. So it's great practice. Even just getting your eyes in and getting the distance on the fly, and going through the same motion.
Yeah, like you say, it's a great tip if you are considering bonefish, and getting that shot off quickly is really important, isn't it? As well, get one or two false casts and fire, isn't it?
It is very much, yeah. You can get distracted by mullet because there's lots of them doing lots of things, but it's a matter of finding out which ones to target, and they're usually the most active ones because they've just seen a pod of shrimp and they go in there, and you got to get in there right then because they can eat those shrimp and move on. So it really is see some disturbance and get your fly on. That really is the key because you get in those fish that are lit up and are willing and ready, and it might not last very long.
Yeah. And are you seeing, as a result of yourself, Colin, seeing more people wandering around chasing, perhaps in the society that we have right now? I guess things are going to change, but where people are unable to travel as freely as they could have done, have you seen, as a result of that, an uptick in numbers of people chasing mullet and asking you for advice and everything else that goes with that?
Yes, very much so. I mean, obviously, it's been well publicised. Colin and I have done a thing on the bank, little TV thing. He wrote the book. He's always in mags, so it's become very popular. But I think the attraction is for freshwater anglers finding something else to do and going from, let's say, river test or dry fly fishing to fishing in the sea. I think it's too wide. Whereas you fish an estuary in skinny water, you get to see the fish, almost the same gear. It's a 6-weight, tiny flies, droppers. It's familiar. It's just the surroundings of the fish that they need to get to. So I think it is a pathway in, albeit a pretty tough one. I've seen a lot of trout guys that have covered fish over and over again, very good fishers, and just can't understand why the fish won't take. They said, well, "What's wrong with me? If I was trout fishing, I'd have 15 fish by now." And it really is that's what you need to try and get over. And changing flies. It's not all about changing flies. It's just about getting to the fish in the right mood. Yeah, it's a little bit about flies, but it really is not as far as trout. I get this all trying to match the hatch, but it's not so much in mullet. But yeah, definitely an easier transition for freshwater guys doing that kind of fishing, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. The spike seems to have really, and it may have been with Colin's book possibly, but I know he's been writing about mullet for a number of years. And I remember years back there were forums, the Saltwater Forum, the UK Saltwater Forum, and everything else where people were talking about mullet, and it was always there in the background, but not in quite the same way. And I do wonder if, like you say, it's people looking for something a little bit different, constrained by travel as well. But what it's done is lit a fire that people have run with, I guess, and said, yeah, absolutely, this is something new that I can try. And as fly anglers, it's pretty nice to have something different to go tackle every now and again as well, isn't it? Keeps us on our toes.
The sea environment, you never know what you're going to catch, which is, I think, a big draw. I mean, I did a bit of still water fishing, but after a while, you're going to catch trout, and you can only eat so much trout. And with the sea, you just don't know. Yeah, you can put it down to bass and mackerel or garfish or whatever, but there's that element of not knowing what you're going to catch or how big. Rivers, I guess, are slightly different, but I don't know too much about that. And actually, that's where I'm learning with the freshwater guys coming into seawater. I'm getting to know some of these guys and learning from them. And I've been up on little trips learning how to do grading and all the rest of it. So it's quite interesting for me. I'm going the opposite way, learning finesse and presentation and all the rest of it, because I'm basically just a clumsy bass fisherman. Learning my way in the freshwater.
And are you taking something from that you're going to apply into your bass and mullet fishing as a result of it?
Oh, big time. One of the reasons I didn't go freshwater was partly because I'm right next to the sea, but also I grew up with predator fishing with big flies, bass, and all the rest of it. And getting into sort of knowing bugs and fly tying on an 18 just wasn't my thing. I'm getting there. But what it has done is taught me presentation. I never fished a dropper before I started mullet fishing. And so I had to change my whole technique of before I was just trying to get the tightest loop and getting the biggest distance. Because when you fish off a boat, you kind of got to get away from the scare area. So it's all about distance. But this was about landing the fly gently and turning over the fly and opening my loop so I didn't have tangles all the time. Well, one of the biggest frustrations was one, a 6-weight, was the lightest rod I've ever used, and two, using a dropper. And I used to tangle all the time, especially trying to punch that into the wind. So eventually I started carrying pre-tied leaders, because there's nothing worse, or actually it's quite good for you, is to see Colin bent over into fish while you're dealing with a tangle. And I couldn't deal with that. No, there's no way. I wasn't going to mess with it. You just put a new leader on and get in the game. Since then, I've learned to open my loops and know you don't punch a dropper with force into the wind. It's just asking for trouble. So you learn how to use the wind and then fish properly. But to answer your question, yes, I've learned a lot about presentation and lighter fishing.
That's really cool. And music to my ears as a casting instructor as well, hearing you talking about opening your loop for your droppers. Big tick from me for that. So very, very good news to hear that too. And you've talked a little bit about your background, and I wanted to drill down into that because it's a fascinating journey that you have taken into fly fishing. But where did the journey of fishing start for you? Where did it all begin?
In a place called Woodley in Berkshire near Reading. I grew up there. Earliest memories were fishing, sonning for tench and watching the bubbles come up. My first significant fish was a 20-inch pike that was caught on Twyford Ford with a little spinner. Probably got off free with a magazine. In those days, you used to get little bits of tackle and magazines, and you do what you can. Dragged this monster 20-inch pike. My brother panicked. I think we were probably 7 or 8 at the time. And he beat it to death with a bucket. I'm afraid to say, and we took it home to eat. Of course, my mother was questioning us whether we actually caught it or found it on the side of the road, etc. And anyway, significant moment for a young lad. A little bit of course fishing, but then I went to the States when I was 19, wanted to be a drummer, wanted to go to music school, etc. That kind of didn't work out, trying to survive in Los Angeles at 19, winning all by yourself, etc. Took over president, and the competition was amazing there. I mean, so much talent music-wise, but, I did a bit of that, played around, but what it did do was send me boat fishing. I was right next to the beach, exposed to a lot of TV in America. Rex Hunt, he was the first one that was kissing them, putting them back, and that kind of sowed the seed for catch and release. What was accessible to me was the sea and charter fishing. So I spent a long time on big charter boats with 30 plus anglers, fishing for halibut and bass with live anchovies and all that kind of stuff. So spent many years doing that, which was absolutely fantastic. And then eventually came home, and that landed me in Nottingham. And that's the first time I was ever landlocked. So I kind of had a choice between fishing a canal with maggots and a float or pick up a fly rod, in my mind. And so I went the fly route and began a fascinating journey, learning from scratch, going to a store like Walker's of Trout, a really old traditional Tweedy type shop, and it just blew my mind. It was amazing, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but it was very, very interesting going on that journey and learning about flies and materials. And then I found myself stopping on the road to look at roadkill just to see if I could use any materials. I never did, but I didn't stop me looking at roadkill, and I thought, what's going on with me? What is this fly fishing thing doing to me? But fascinating journey. And that's where I did a little bit of trout and went to a few reservoirs, tried to learn the ropes, etc. I remember one time I was at Collick Park and some kind gentleman came up to me and offered me some help. Well, that was fantastic, but it's also a signal that I was pretty useless and I had to do something about it. And then I took to the fields and started practicing because it always looked really cool fly fishing. And so I promised myself I'd get good at fly fishing so that I could do something when I was old. And but I didn't wait till then because it was so much fun. And I love casting in fields. In fact, I think it's a separate sport. I can quite enjoy casting by itself. Although I'm not a nerdy caster, I just want to be good and I just don't want to be intimidated because I've been on foreign trips that I'm not quite prepared for. And it's a big difference in having some confidence on the water when you spend all that money to go out, and the key is to doing the homework. And if you know what you're doing and you know how to improve, it's interesting. I've spent a lot of time, like a lot of your people on here, have spent a lot of time on sexy loops, going through the exercises, and it's worth doing. I think one of the most important things I've done was record myself on film. Just strapping a camera to a post and filming yourself casting, especially from the side, or actually looking in the mirror just for form and see what your actual motions are. I mean, I'm fascinated with tracking and go through all the exercise of letting it go and seeing how straight it is behind you. those are things to do in the winter. And it keeps your hand in. I do think casting is a sport. And every time I get an opportunity, I do cast, even if it's 10 minutes, just to keep my arm in, really. I've learned that the hard way by trying to muscle heavy rods and ending up with an operation through bad technique. So that's kind of my reminder that technique is everything, and it's not force.
That's great, and really interesting point that as well about not forcing it. And I think sometimes people may look for a new rod or whatever it is to improve. It's not going to make you cast any further. It might help a tiny bit, but getting the rod and line combination correct, but being able to use it is the key aspect of it. But in that little segment there, you've talked about so much and how your fishing career began, and then the move to America. And it was interesting you mentioned Rex Hunt on there, because funnily enough, I got a message from somebody the other day to say you should talk to Steve Starling, who used to appear on that program as well, who is a very knowledgeable angler as well. With there was Bushy as well, wasn't he? He was more the fly fishing guy, but I'm told Steve is from a fly fishing background as well. So funnily enough, that has come up. But moving to Los Angeles at 19, that must have been pretty special. Instrument wise, it was drums. You went to music school. Were you gigging? Were you playing in bands? That to me is really, really interesting as well. So how did you navigate that dramatic change in lifestyle, and also try and find a career there as well? And how was that? And how did you find that culture shock, I guess?
Fascinating. I was starstruck, wanted to be a musician, saw these amazing guys, went to a lot of jazz clubs, had a few lessons, had one from Alex Acuna just because he was available. And I went there and learnt an awful lot. I did a few little gigs, but really didn't, I just played at it really because trying to survive in LA was the main thing. Had to get a job, got married, got distracted by lots of other things. Great time. Music is still a huge part of my life. But I didn't really branch out into career. I think it's just competition was just too damn much. I mean, you had 5-year-olds that could play their ass off. They really could. It's probably a confidence thing as well. But I was quite happy making that. Going away from that, priorities change. Had 2 young kids, and that sort of took over everything really. Didn't stop me fishing, mind, but it did sort of stop me drumming, etc. I did a bit of gigging before I went out, semi-pro, but not. It sounds more glamorous than it was. Let's put it that way. Yeah. But no, it's always been with me. I mean, I've got electronic kit in my bedroom right here, and I use that for escapism. And it's a hand thing too. I'm not sure what it is. I love casting. I love drumming. It's a rhythmic thing. I think when we did this podcast before, I ruined it by tapping on the desk too much. So it's just one of those things. No, music, it's like fishing, takes you to some amazing places and meet lots of people.
Yeah. And we talked about music as well, and we'll touch on that a little bit because I know you mentioned jazz clubs there, so that was obviously important. One of my favourite groups came out of LA called Maze, and I know you have a shared love of soul music with me, and I know you put a link to Incognito or something, who are magnificent. And I have to share with you now, and if our listeners haven't listened to it, my friends and I are meeting up to go and see the Blackbirds, who were, if you know Donald Byrd, who was a trombonist.
Donald Byrd,
he's sadly no longer with us. But his band are coming over in May, so we're going to see the Blackbirds. And if you do listen to music, check out The Places and the Spaces by Donald Byrd and the Blackbirds, because it's just beautiful. It's clever. I think Donald Byrd played on Blue Note as well as a trombonist. Absolutely fantastic. So, it must have been amazing at that time to enjoying that. And it also, you're saying about LA in the current edition of Fly Culture, one of my closest friends, Ray
That's
Kuramoto,
right.
has written about casting off the beach in Los Angeles and the culture there, and covers it. And did you find a similar, I know you obviously have the magazine, and did that resonate with you, of hitting the sea early morning and catching a few fish?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was right there. Used to do the same thing. I didn't get into fly fishing there. I wish I had. I wasn't aware of it so much on the West Coast. I know it was quite prevalent on the East Coast where I go now. But I do remember trying to learn how to cast a multiplier off the beach. And at the time, owning a spinning rod, and that was fine. And I used to have no problems with that. And then used to try to cast with a multiplier until I had a horrendous bird's nest. But so I put that down and used a spinning rod. And gradually, the intervals between the bird's nest got longer and longer. And I do remember one day, it's kind of like hitting a golf ball where I hit the sweet spot and it just went. And it wasn't effort. It was just timing. And then you learn how to educate your thumb, because that was pre-level winds. And even now, even if I'm using a level wind, I still have to use my thumb, because it's just ingrained that if you want to keep fishing, you don't get a bird's nest. And yeah, I remember that big time. Surf perch you mentioned, fantastic little things, and they go on little mole crabs. I would love to go and catch one on the fly now, because it'd be very easy to do. It's a bit like our bream in some respects, but right in the surf. Yeah, great stuff. Some good fishing there. Halibut mostly, some bass, some corvina. I did go down to Baja a couple of times, travelled there in the car, San Felipe for some croakers and things, and I took a trip down to Capo San Lucas, which was a dream trip. I was a complete rookie, though, and ruined it by forgetting my sunglasses.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine being Baja San Lucas on a panga, trying to go out and get some big Dorados, and all you do is scream because you forgot with glare. And I was just big lesson. Big lesson. Don't go out there without your sunglasses. But what did I know? I didn't know shit. But,
and did you find roosterfish? Were they down there?
No, that always on my list and still is now. Running Down the Man was one of my favourite movies. It used to be the soundtrack. Going back to music was my ringtone for a long time. And I do love looking at or hearing fly fishing tracks to movies, some soundtracks. I always try and find. That's why I find new artists, really, because I hear something and it just matches the video really well, and I need to find out what that is. So I think fly fishing and music goes together quite well in terms of all the movies coming out and all the great tunes that go with it. But, Southern California, loved it. Absolutely loved it.
So was that, we talked about culture shock, you going to Los Angeles, you obviously married, had children, and came back to the UK. Was that a culture shock in a different way when you came back again?
Very much so. It was a time when I was bringing up my family. We had the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. We had guns in schools. My English wife was getting a bit homesick and never had any family support because I had two young kids there, and all I was doing was going fishing. So from her perspective, she kind of like, and I've been there 15 years, she'd been there 10. We kind of wanted to bring our kids up in England. So it was a move for the right reasons. LA is a wonderful place when you're young and single, but not so great for bringing a family up. So that was the reason for coming back. And the reason why I didn't go back to Bournemouth was because that's where Marie's from, in Nottingham. So again, it was a completely different thing, where it was the first time I hadn't lived near the sea for a very long time. And fishing was a huge part of my life. So that's I kind of got forced down a route, and I'm very pleased I did that, because I picked up a fly rod, and I'm still doing it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So you said you were you said you were sort of landlocked. So did that mean that you were picking up the fly rod and you were heading to still waters primarily?
There was a reservoir there and the occasional still water. Used to go to Rutland on a trip. So, yeah, there wasn't, unless you had a ticket and were really sort of au fait with fly fishing, it was quite difficult other than still waters because, and they serve the purpose. They're great. I mean, how else do you learn? By getting a day ticket, going and catching a fish, and knowing there's fish in there, and it's a great way to start, I think. And it teaches you got trees, which is another thing I'm not used to. From on the beach or on a boat, you just cast, and then first cast on still waters usually ends up in a tree because I forget they're there. So quite a transition, really.
Yeah. And so, did you discover that the fly rod was for you? Was there a point when the spinning rods didn't become as important for you as they were, and surf rods and multipliers and everything else? Was there did you realise there was a moment when you thought, actually, this might be for me with the fly rod more so than the other methods that you've been using?
Yeah, that didn't happen till a lot later when I came back down to Bournemouth, and really got to join the Bass Anglers Sports Society. So I started off with lure fishing and all the rest of it, and then I transitioned to the fly rod, but saltwater fly rod. I sort of jumped straight in there and missed out a whole bunch of learning, really. I went straight into saltwater, and that's how I transitioned.
And was there much of a saltwater scene? I assume we're similar sort of ages in the sense of that first. I know people have been throwing fly rods for bass and everything else for a number of years if we delve down into history. But I would think probably the early 2000s was when it sort of started to get going. And then 03, 04, 05, there was a little bit more of a scene. Would that be fair to say that's when you were starting to play with those rods a little bit more seriously?
Yeah. Again, Bass Society were quite key in that there was a group of fly fishers and they fished the salt. But it was very underground, if you like, partly because not many people were doing it. It was a close-knit society, and there were lots of people taking fish. So you had to be kind of guided from your spots because saltwater fly, in fly fishing, you've got to get quite close to your prey. So, it is quite intimate. The marks do matter because you can't throw it, 50 yards out to sea. You've got to be quite close. So it was quite a little bit hard to break into, but I met certain people and they took me under their wing and taught me how to cast. They spent a lot of time with me, to be honest. A lot of casting into the wind, going down to the coast, off the beach, all sorts of known marks. So I had a bit of a hand in trying to, in learning where the marks were and fishing with some really, really good anglers. It's really exploded from those days, and we are talking about 2000. Those were the people that encouraged me to go Cape Cod, my first sort of international trips, where I was amazed to see hundreds of people on the beach fly fishing. It was just normal, and it started to catch up here, especially recently when we've developed a saltwater fly fishing festival with Orvis, and that really brings it home to me when I see gangs of people on the beach. It reminds me of the east coast of the States, where they do a lot of it.
And stripers or striped bass and our bass, are there comparisons? Is there, I guess the way you're hunting them down may be slightly similar. What about them to catch, to play? And I guess you did this a fair bit as well, didn't you?
Yes, I've had 11 trips. I usually go every year. I'm planning one for 1st of June, and it's a really great thing that we do because we've got about a dozen people that go over from the UK, but we all book as individuals. We all stay in the same motel, so you've got a group dynamic without all the hassle. And so you share information, but you tend to break off in couples or do your own thing. So that makes it very, very easy just to rock up, and which is why I've done it every year. It's a bit like home from home, and familiarity is quite a good thing because you know where to go. And when you go to a new place, half the time you're trying to learn where the fish are, unless you hire a guide. With this, I've cut that out by having a dozen guys that have been there before me and helped me out, and I could probably guide in Cape Cod right now because I know it so well. Similarities, yes. There's a lot more bait and a lot more fish, and therefore a lot easier to find. It's just more fish, and it is. Yeah, it's hard to make a comparison, to be honest, because of the amount of fish there and the variety of places you can fish. And you can fish creeks, open beaches, flats. You name it. There's. It sort of reminds me of the Solent, where we have the festival, the Hailing Island and Langston, and all. There's all different places, and you can spend all day sort of going around different marks. It's kind of like that kind of place where you can go all sorts of places. It's a peninsula, so you can different places to get out the wind, all sorts of variety, and it's great fun just traveling in the car, going to different spots, and then meeting up in the evening and comparing. But because we're fishing migrating fish, it's silly to try and chase other people's fish, because by the time they tell you, they've moved, and so it is a migration. So you kind of got to stay with it and run around and try and find where the fish are, which is quite interesting.
Nice. And am I right in thinking, would there be bluefish and possibly false albacore as well in the mix?
False albacore, and very interestingly, your friend who did the last podcast mentioned false albacore, I believe. And another interesting thing he said, sorry to change the subject, was buying a line first and matching a rod to the line, which I thought was quite amazing, because I do believe a rod and line combination is where it's at, not just one or the other. But the fact that he wanted to buy a rod to to fish the line was really quite interesting. False albacore, basically back end of the season. There's two seasons in Cape Cod. One is when they go north from Chesapeake Bay all the way up to Maine, and in the fall they come down on the way back. It's usually the fall, when it's warmer, that you get the false albacore. And New Jersey are a great place for that. I've not actually done it. I've done bonita in California, but false albacore is not normally around when we go in spring. Bluefish haven't been around I haven't been for 3 years because of COVID, but up till then, they seem to have gone away. Where I've had early years, we've had a lot of bluefish, and they are fantastic fun. Very aggressive, great way to get rid of all your crappy flies, because they just, when you got bluefish, because they'll bite you off because you need wire. They've got amazing teeth, and one of the few fish that will actually try and bite you.
Yeah,
evil things.
Yeah.
But super speedy, very, very sporty, a really exciting fish to catch. But yeah, very, very sharp teeth. And one thing I've seen several guys do, especially at night, is a lot of the Bass Society used to fish big plugs at night for huge stripers. But they'd be thumbing these things, putting them back, and all of a sudden they'd go to thumb a bluefish and pull out just before the fingers gets removed. So you got to be a bit careful with those. But super aggressive fish and good fun. And you'll see them come to you miles off, because they hit the water, and the water explodes when they sort of hit the prey. Quite visual.
Nice.
But yeah, bluefish is quite exciting.
Yeah, I think I've been lucky enough actually in Venezuela to catch false albacore, and I can't remember if I mentioned that in the podcast. We will, but they were just phenomenal. And as a tester, as a fly angler, you're waiting for them to bust on the bait. You had to make a long cast with minimal false casts and then rip and hang on. And I was fortunate enough to catch all sorts of stuff there. But that is the fish I remember the most. I remember the pancakes where you'd fish these little atolls for bonefish coming on, which was super exciting. But those false albacore were phenomenal. And one day perhaps I might get the chance to go fish for those again, but I think they were absolutely fantastic. So coming back to the UK again, you travelled a bit. We're going to come on to bonefish again. I know at the beginning we talked about that a little bit more in some of the trips that you've been on there. So the fly rods really become in your hand a lot of the time. And then getting a boat, and I've been fortunate enough to be a passenger on your boat or a guest on your boat. It must have been a real game changer for you, mustn't it?
Very much so, yeah. It just opens up everything. Partly because you can take all the tackle you want, and it's it's a floating tackle shop. Is my boat. You can take all the kit you want, and you can just cover so much. And nothing more that I love than drifting a shoreline, to be honest. And the ironic thing is, you buy a boat just to fish back to the shore, whereas if you're on the shore, you want to try and get it to the horizon. But no, nothing better than just drifting along a beach and casting at structured rocks and waves and all the rest of it. And I love it. It's quite difficult at times. You've got to be very, very careful not to spend more time boating than fishing. But I did a significant thing a few years ago by buying a trolling motor, which is a GPS controlled. It's a motor guide with remote control. So I've got this thing on. You didn't see it that time because I only use it when I'm outside. And what it does is you can hit the button and anchor on the spot because it stays within 5 feet of its GPS mark, and that is a game changer. You can control the drift, and what it does is basically control the wind. It's a bit like having a drogue, but a lot more fancy because I can nudge 5 feet either direction just by a button. So really, I can fish by myself and not have to worry about the boat blowing off, because pre-trolling motor, especially if you're in a shoulder bass, for instance, you get a big bust up with bass and you're in there and then it goes. And then you have to, or you've drifted off it with the wind. So then you have to crank up the noisy engine, go back without disturbing the fish, try and get back on the same drift for another sort of few casts. With the trolling motor, you just hit it and you can stay with them. And it actually has put a lot more fish on the boat. And equally, headlands where you couldn't possibly anchor and you drift off really quickly, you can hang in that drift and swing your flies around and catch the fish. It's an amazing contraption, and it's a game changer for the boat. I've even actually had mullet within sort of 5-6 feet of the boat, where I've just hung on the motor and then just, because it's really quite quiet, it's an electric motor. But they've used it in the States for ages, but not many people use it in the salt here. Also extremely good for pike fishing up the river, because you could just hang on a spot and fish under trees and all the rest of it. So boat fishing is quite something. Having said that, instead of going fishing on this lovely day now, I've got to go and take the oil seals up my prop shaft, so I'm going to be up to here in Greece later. So, it's a mixed blessing at times.
Yeah, there's a price for everything. But I noticed on the day, as I said, that I had with you guys, which was outstanding. If you haven't listened to the podcast, I hope you have, that I did with Paul and Colin live on the flats, actually catching some mullet. But it gave us that flexibility, and I could sense that you guys felt it wasn't happening in one spot, so it was easy for us to move position. And that just makes the ball game completely different from what could be a tough day into a memorable day, really. And that certainly made a hell of a difference from that point of view. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that. And your skills with not just the coffee machine, but the boat were absolutely outstanding, mate.
Yeah, you haven't seen all the cock-ups I've done in the past, that's why. So, But yeah, I kind of know what I'm doing, but sometimes it goes wrong. But I love the freedom of the boat. And like you say, when things get a bit too popular and there's too many on the mark, then I can just pop over the other side and in the boat and choose another mark, because I don't like crowds. I love people and I love socialising, but I don't like crowds, strange as I am.
Yeah, no, that gives you that flexibility, although it was amusing seeing somebody on the flat and chatting to him, and he sort of turned out to be a fly culture reader and recognised us as we were wandering along, which was quite amusing and very touching from that point of view. So sometimes it's nice to be in a crowd, but I'm like you, I like the solitary side of things. But there's been this sort of thread between other forms of saltwater fishing, and particularly the comparisons between bonefish and mullet, and we've touched on that a little bit. So tell me a little bit about your bone fishing experience and where you've been, and if you have a favourite destination that you've loved to visit.
I haven't done much warm water fishing, but after sort of 8 years in a row going to Cape Cod, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different and branch out into warm water. My friend persuaded me to go to Lost Rockies, and that's the only bone fishing I've done, but I think I got spoiled because of the nature of the place and the nature of the bone fishing. Amazing. I love the culture of South America. I love the warm water, and that's where I think I'm probably happiest. The downside of Cape Cod is cold water, so you need your waders. Whereas warm water, you don't need half as much clothes and all the rest of it, so you can go quite light. Loved Lost Rockies. Just the ability to go off in a little boat and go to different islands and places, and just the beauty of the place, seeing fish. I mean, I saw a bonefish the first time I landed on the beach from the boat. Got out of the boat, put out, and I got a bonefish first cast. It was unreal. They had to move the boat for me to land it. And to tick it off like that first day was just fabulous, because then you can relax and enjoy it. And, you've got that bonefish and all the rest of it. No, absolutely love that place. Proper warm water flats fishing, sight water, jacks. We got a tarpon off the beach. We actually landed one, which was amazing. I landed for the bloke doing that off the beach with hands in its mouth, trying not to knock it off the line. Absolutely brilliant. Loved bone fishing. Absolutely love it when they do scream across the water and the line looks like a cheese cutter going through cheese, and the line goes up and the sounds, and just amazing. I kind of got spoiled because of the quality of the bonefish, and they're predatory as well. As you mentioned before, the little floating minnows next to pelican, that's quite bizarre. But good bone fishing, and caught plenty of them. Really, we kind of wanted to do DIY because of our egos. We didn't want a guide, although we had a guide between us. We kind of did our own thing for the first hour until I realised you can't hold a bonefish. You've got to let it go. Busted off the first bit. Brilliant. What do I know? And so once I got into the idea of you've got to hook it and then let it go, which is completely unnatural, when I'm used to bullying bass and things, then I kind of got into the swing and really loved it. I do want to go back. It's a little bit dangerous at the moment, but the whole thing about Lost Rockies was quite amusing to me. Having to stay in a hotel with a electric fence around it, having to change your money in the back of a bus, and £100 is like a suitcase worth of whatever the currency is quite amusing to me. However, a sad part of it is it's they're quite poor. They struggle for water, and this is at Lost Rockies, which is one of the glamorous venues. And mainland is just quite shocking. I've got a couple of Venezuelans that work for me, and they keep telling me, don't go back yet, it's too dangerous. But I'd love to. The other warm water fishing I've done is in Exmouth in Australia. Unfortunately, I've got a friend who used to fish with me. He's the guy that actually taught me how to lure fish here. He went to Perth and he lives out there, and I've been out twice now to Exmouth, which is one of the best places in the world to fish. Just completely different, all off a boat mostly. You're talking about Spanish mackerel, tuna, cobia, all sorts of trevally, and whales all over the place, and humpback whales are just... One of the guides calls them speed bumps, and for good reason, because he landed with his boat on one, and he happened to be at a wedding in England before I got out there, and told me stories of the fact that he landed a boat on a humpback, and I just kind of didn't believe it. But having been there and seen them come up in the middle of nowhere when you're doing 30 knots, I can believe it. It can actually be quite dangerous, but just amazing to see. Absolutely amazing place. Harsh, real harsh. I mean, it can get 42, 44 degrees, and it's the kind of place where you can drink 5 litres of water and don't need to go to the toilet because you just sweat all the water out. It's just quite amazing. But, again, love to get back, but just wait for restrictions to lift.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of remember Lost Rockies, even from the airport, you could see tarpon while you're waiting to collect luggage. You could see them there. I, like you, caught one from the beach. We saw it leap. We thought it was about £70, but like you say, all the boat lines, and it did mean the boat lines, and that's one of those fish that you remember for a very, very long time. But it looks and sounds as though you've got lots of things planned. I want to, while I've had you, and there's been on these previous podcasts lots of information about saltwater fishing in the UK, but I wondered if I could pick your brains a little bit, and if you could give me a couple of tips for mullet, and perhaps a couple of tips for bass as well, that we can pass on to listeners, that if they're considering, if they haven't done it already, or if they have been thinking about it, might help push them over the edge to give it a go. What advice would you give someone looking, let's start with mullet, to somebody that you would give some advice to?
Run away. Mullet. I think the main thing is picking a spot and watching it for several tides. I don't think you could just rock up, expect to catch a mullet. You need to, if you're fortunate to see them, they are creatures of habit, and you need to find out when they come up on the tide, how long they stay, and get a bit of a chance of targeting these things, because they're in different moods. And the only way really to get used to that is having a spot and visiting it many times over. That's what I've done, and it's been a hell of a discipline. I mean, several times I've wanted to go, oh, stop this, I want to go bass fishing. It's so much easier. And it can be a bit of a chore and soul destroying in some respects by going out there and not catching fish. So you got to get over, you've got to realize that the rewards are extremely worthwhile, though. I think Colin's books are major. I think there's lots of things to read. Patience, and trying to get, if you're from freshwater, then you kind of got to throw the book away in terms of fly selection and matching the hatch and all the rest of it. You kind of just got to get one thing that's helped me is having flies I can trust. So it takes that whole thing away. If you're constantly changing flies because you're not confident, that's a big distraction. I think 1 or 2 flies that you know have been successful, stick with them and take that whole distraction away of trying to change flies and all the rest of it. Get in the water with them. I think it's a lot easier to see. Waders is a must. In fact, a lot of times I'll get on my knees and look at sort of water level, because sometimes it's easier to see a disturbance that way rather than looking high and you've got wind disturbance. That's one. And stealthiness. So wander around and keep looking and keep changing the angle, because one moment you can see nothing, you go sort of a couple of feet up and take it from another angle and you can start seeing fish. Good eyeglasses is an absolute must. But stick with it. If anybody wants to sort of write to me and ask me some questions, I'll be happy to answer. But I kind of run out of things to say on that one.
No, I think that's some great advice as well. And I like the idea of the kneeling down thing, be it looking for disturbance, nervous water, whatever. There's another bonefish comparison there, isn't it? Nervous water. Those sorts of things are great tips. And like you've alluded to, and I've spoken about numerous times, get a rod and line that work really well together, and practice, if you don't already, double haul, I guess, as well, will save you and make life so much easier.
Yeah, one thing I would say is, if you think it's a fish, it was. That's something I heard in Australia, meaning if you haven't cast to it, it's too late. So if you think about it, just cast to it. By the time you're trying to look and see if it's a fish, it's probably gone. So fortune favours the brave sometimes.
Yeah, I like that. So let's put you on the spot here. Bass or mullet? Which is your favourite?
Here, mullet. Only because, it's because I fished for bass a long, long time. And mullet have teased me for many, many, many years until I've decided to do something about it. I spent an awful lot of time with it and kind of know what I'm doing. Probably more for mullet now than bass, because I've just been doing it so long. Bass are easier to catch but harder to find. and bigger bass is quite difficult. And I think mainly it's getting down below the small bass, because you can very easily get into a shoal of schoolies, and you think that's great, but you're never going to catch a big bass, because the small ones are going to catch the big ones. So it really is knowing the habit of the fish and getting. I think the bigger bass tend to sweep up after the teenagers. So, you get a big bust out to sea, and the big bass will be sinking below, waiting for all the scraps and stuff, because they're smarter. They're not going to rush around. So, knowing that, I think, because a lot of people catch bass very easily, but can't really take the next step for a bigger bass, and you kind of got to walk away from the schoolies to find more structure and know the habits. Mullet, I love because of the sight fishing element. I mean, if I could sight fish for bass, it'd be a more difficult question. I think mullet, because it's more rewarding. It's one thing that you can do in the middle of this in sunny weather in the middle of the afternoon. You can't really do that with many other fish. In fact, it's nicer when it's warm and sunny. More difficult because you've got to be stealthier, but it gets the shrimp going and the feeding, and it's just really, really pleasant. I think it's the sight fishing thing that does it for me, and you kind of get spoiled seeing fish, targeting fish, seeing it all happen, and they are good value for money. They really are. Frustrating as hell, but it's so sweet when you get one because of it. And you can't bully them. Bass you can bully to a certain extent. Once they're hooked, I mean, you can really lay into them. You can't do that with mullet. They will get their own back. Mullet.
Brilliant. Good answer. You talked about looking forward to March when the mullet hopefully start appearing on the flats. What other plans do you have for this coming year?
Interesting. I've been looking at Cape Cod. Difficult. I've got to go because I haven't been there. I haven't gone for 3 years, and I've got to go. But prices of car hire is crazy. That's much more than the flight, and the exchange rate sucks. But I'm going to go anyway. So first couple of weeks of June, I'll be in Cape Cod with a few mates of mine who are going, and that's helped push me over the edge. I kind of want to look at Sanibel Island. I've never done, but I quite fancy it for snook and some tarpon, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm doing the saltwater festival here in September, which is a nice week to look forward to. A lot of fly fishers attend that, and a lot of good fly fishers too. It's got quite a bit of credibility for a saltwater fly event. And Orvis has done a fantastic job with that, and it's become quite a good community thing. And it's a competition, but it's more of a festival, and I'm really enjoying that. And again, it is helping build anglers on the beach with a fly rod. I think you're going to see more of that because of that festival. So lots of plans. I'd love to get back to Exmouth, but it's a function of time and money, really, and I'm trying to work out that equation.
Yeah. Nice you mentioned snook as well. They're one of my faves. I love snook. Underrated.
I've caught a tiny one in a little pond at the back of Lost Rockies, but it sounds like a lovely place to go fish.
Yeah, fantastic. Paul, it's been brilliant to catch up. Thank you. As Paul said earlier, that we had some issues. We recorded one of these before, but it didn't quite come out. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. How can people find you if they want to ask some questions and bits and pieces? How do they find you what are your social media handles?
I'm on Facebook. Don't do Twitter, Instagram a little bit, but not much. Just via Facebook mostly. Send me a PM and I'll try and answer it.
Fantastic. So just search for Paul Jennings and you should find him. There'll be lots of pictures of a man holding mullet. So that's how you will find him in case there are some other Paul Jennings out there. But you should find him that way. Paul, thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been absolutely fantastic to see you again and to talk with you again.
Thank you very much. Look forward to taking you out again in a few months' time, Pete. And thank you for all that you do with these podcasts and the magazine. I find it brilliant to be able to sit on my advice actually and listen to other people. And you've got some great guests, absolutely fascinating stuff. And thank you for all you do for our community, really.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Everyone, that has been Paul Jennings. We've talked about many things today, but thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. As ever, there will be plenty more very, very soon. And please, again, I put this at the end. I don't know why you're supposed to say it, but please consider subscribing if you've enjoyed these. I'm told it helps, but I've absolutely no idea why. But thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.